Hi guys, welcome everybody to week 10. This is one of the two videos that we're gonna be having on this week. One is on licensing and another one is in documentation. So this one is about documentation and trying to help you as much as we can in that. Um, so what are we gonna talk today? Okay, we're gonna always see where are we and where are we going. The goal of the week is to acquire best practices for hardware documentation. We're going to provide you with a simplified or simple approach and then a more comprehensive and in-depth approach, as we always try to do. So uh, let's go to a simple, simplified, simplistic solution if you like. And it's definitely the minimum you should aim for to get your hardware documented. This is a very nice little GIF that shows how you can measure a bit how open is your project, and they call it the open O-meter. There's the reference here, but it basically says you should publicly have the design files or the source. Instructions to assemble should be great to have publicly available bill of materials. I think this also comes before this one actually. Presence of a contribution guidelines. Then the idea is that the materials and source that you provide are editable so that people can contribute, right? So this is what they provide. Definitely you should provide a source files, a bill of materials, instructions and guides, and yeah, how people can contribute to your project. We have talked about it. But also there is the open source hardware checklist. We have provided you with the link as well, and they kind of have a checklist. One interesting thing is to have images. There are more legal issues with regard to the license of your documentation, and yeah, this is an example of how they do it. So we'll not go into detail because it's really specific and you can do it on your own, but just to point you to that and use it as a tool. But these two tools that we are talking about is mainly addresses the use of the source, right? Some have talked about contribution, but yeah, this is the basic you should have to make your product open source, your documentation, your open source documentation right, is to make sure that the users can access your source and that there's some guides on how to use the source, and yeah, that's really the minimum. But we always talk about how to facilitate or make it easy for contributors or people that replicate your hardware and want to and have a variant, because in hardware that is always many times the case. And we have said before in week 6 about the tools, like the basic tools that you can use, like GitHub and GitLab issues, markdown files, GitHub and GitLab wiki. They also have a wiki. These are very simple. You can start using right away. And more advanced stuff like documentation websites, newsletters and blogs, and social media. We're going to be talking also about documentation websites and show you some examples of that. So we talked about the really basic thing that you should aim for in your repo, and I think you know quite a bit already that you should have the license. Andre is talking about the license in another video of how to approach it, but you need to have the contribution guidelines, the README, and so on, right? But I want to take you a bit a step back into the history of how content, open source content, has been delivered in different times, right? And we want to go from wikis to repos to static site generators and beyond. And this illustration I made is basically explaining a bit how the content and content delivery infrastructure have evolved and impact open source, right? And also, of course, the project, but the content delivery infrastructures, I'm talking about wikis, and I'm talking about GitHub, Git as well, I would say. but the internet also is involved there. And let's talk further about the wikis. That's the I would say, according to my understanding, is one of the first, if not the first, um, let's say, revolution with regard to collaborative content delivery. Remember that Wikipedia is based on wikis, and that uh, really exploded in a creativity and mass production of content around the world, from where everyone could participate according to certain rules and contribution guidelines, right? And if you look at the history of, and how the RepRap project started, it started with a wiki. And it's interesting because they used wikis which were open source, and they hosted their own wiki. And many open source projects and initiatives have used wikis for for a long time. Also, open source ecology, which I happen to contribute a bit to their projects. Um, so wikis open a door of content creation, but we are we are in a new era of content delivery that is very different from wikis. So I wanted to also talk to you about GitHub and what happened with GitHub. GitHub revolutionized the way in which source code is managed, because it has created boilerplate guides. It has integrated project management tools like issue management with Git. So GitHub is a Git hosting service, but it's more than a Git hosting service. It has all these features like forking, automated licensing, Kanban boards, issue management, labeling of all these issues, and of course, it's the place where there are more repositories in the entire world now, as far as I know, right? Then there is GitLab and others, but the point is that it's a very fast, reliable, ubiquitous content delivery system for the context of source code, and also people have used it in open hardware, right? But bear in mind that uh, open source hardware has been using tools that come from other contexts and can be useful in the open hardware world, but there is always a trick or a risk of just copy pasting something that it doesn't necessarily uh, apply or solve all the issues of open hardware, right? So we wanted to talk about it as well. But I also wanted to talk about this the Jamstack revolution. Basically, is the JavaScript API and CMS applications that consume data from, for instance, GitHub or CMS or whatever. It's a bit technical what I'm saying, but the point is that now you can easily host pages and websites, static websites in GitHub, GitLab, and also Netlify and others, right? And there are many examples of static site generators. For instance, the one that we are using for this course is in ViewPress, and that's a static site generator system. And it's very interesting because it's very customizable and it has a lot of advantages. But there are many options. So what we are providing you with is with a comparison of static site generators, where you can see. I can tell you that we are familiar. I mean, our team is familiar with Hugo. I haven't used Hugo, but Andre and Alex have used it. I have used ViewPress. I think these guys have also used mkdoc, which is based in Python. And I have used recently a lot Gridzone, which is very nice. I also provide you with a link on how to choose the best, and maybe we can talk about it in the chat later. But it's really intricate topic, so I wouldn't like to go now in this tutorial or in this presentation on that one. So please ask questions about it. And the point I wanted to make is that there are so many options that today focusing on content delivery and content strategy is perhaps more important than the tool you choose. And what I mean by that is that, again, understanding your context and how far you want to go, and how do you see your project and your content being consumed is more important than anything else, right? And that's also challenging. And that brings us again to the fact that we are essentially talking about user channels and contributor channels. And think of the channels in the context of documentation as content delivery channels, where people can contribute to this content, but also can consume it. Of course, again, you need to understand your value proposition and all these things, and you need to keep refining this, because this is really a more in-depth understanding of how you want to address this with these tools, right? I definitely recommend this approach, which I started getting into it by a blog that was called "What Nobody Tells You About Documentation," and it's basically saying that documentation is not one thing, but are several things. You need to provide tutorials, and they are learning oriented. You need to provide how-to guides, and they are problem oriented. You need to provide explanation and references. So this is a very nice, let's say, structure that you can use, and concepts that provide you with a more in-depth understanding of what this documentation activity is. You can go really, really deep, but it really depends on, again, on the resources and how important the project you're working on is. So I'm gonna quickly open this one because it's very, very nice, and I wanted to show you. I wanted to give you like a very fast tour. So this is a documentation-like website, and you will see that they have a nice introduction, and they have examples of what to put in the introduction, right? They explain you all this that I just talked about. They have these tutorials, and they give you examples again. So you should be able to use this as a template or as an example to start documenting your project if you choose to apply this pattern of documentation. So this is, remember, where this was done by people from the Python community, the Django community, I believe. So this is for really heavy technical things, or software and things like that. So it depends on how complex is your project, or how complex are the activities you wanna support with this documentation. So you shouldn't also overdo it if it's not needed. But there are very nice explanation here, and I would say, for instance, for projects where you are working on several hardware pieces of hardware, like for instance, I know the people from LibreSolar, you might want to have something like this. In fact, they have something like that that I recommended to them. I think it was called Learn LibreSolar, and they were using, I helped them to set up a ViewPress website, and if you see, they started documenting some things in this format, and they have really, and this is a very nice example because they are providing a lot of context and references to solar DC system, right? They have component development here, and this is an open source project. So I think it's a really interesting example of how it is applied. I think I will put it actually here. I know Martin myself is a really nice guy, so I'll put it here. Whoops. Well, I'll share it later. But I also put the video of the guy that created this presentation, which is really nice. And there are things that are really more, let's say, are getting more complex, or challenges that we need to solve in the open hardware world. I would like to mention quickly the federated content delivery for open hardware. So there is what I mean by this is that, remember that the idea of open source hardware is that we are also providing a service for users, and we want to give it in context. So we want to reference other projects. We want to show our projects beside other projects, and kind of contribute in the network of content delivery of the entire open hardware world, because now it's a bit messy and there's a lot of different kinds of websites and stuff. So that is still a challenge. So I wanted to mention the open know-how specification, which is a way to make your hardware more accessible, and they have it's a work in progress, but it's very interesting. They are providing a way of linking and referencing different open hardware projects and make it findable and so on. Maybe it's good to talk in more specificity in the chat about it. And it's important to know and think about content delivery beyond repositories. Repositories happen to be the way in which source is delivered, source code, and repositories is not even projects. So in open source in software, you normally have one project or one organization that have many repositories. So I think this is something also to talk about, and I also think that it's good to think about other applications coming up like Wikifactory, or solutions where you could do something like Wikifactory for your own context. So I'm thinking, for instance, about auto DIY, where you might want to have variations of your project, variants of your project, and also document those variants. A repo is not enough, or a collection of repo might not be the best solution, and probably is the case for many other projects like Archimedricos and UC2. So I think I would encourage you guys to ask more questions about this, and I will jump quickly to the week assignments. At least for the documentation part, the assignment is to update your documentation so that it complies with the open source hardware checklist and the open source O-meter, right? That would be ideal. Optional and more advanced, you can follow the guidelines provided in the DVO documentation website that I just showed you, and try to apply it to your context. I encourage you again to ask questions in the chat so that we can help you out. If you want to set up a GitHub page, website or whatever, maybe we can help you with that. So yeah, I think we have covered mostly everything about documentation that we wanted to cover. So I hope you guys are still doing great and improving your project, and I hope to see you soon. So take care, and have a good next week.